Open your kitchen cupboard. Somewhere in there is a small jar. Black pepper maybe, cinnamon, some dried oregano going stale in the back. Pick one up. You are holding something with almost no calories. No fat, no protein, nothing that would keep a starving body alive for even an hour. An animal fighting to survive should walk straight past it. And yet human beings have crossed oceans for this stuff, gone bankrupt for it, started wars over it. One of them was even packed into the nose of a dead pharaoh. We have risked everything, again and again, for flavor. The only real question is when this beautiful madness began, and the answer is older than the first city on Earth. And the answer reaches back further than the first city, further than the first farmed field, past the very edge of our own species. So let's start with the ones who weren't even us. Around 50,000 years ago, in a cave called El Sidrón in the Green Mountains of northern Spain, a group of Neanderthals lived, ate, and died. In 2012, a team led by the archaeologist Ceren Hardy scraped the hardened plaque off their fossil teeth. That plaque, called dental calculus, is basically fossilized bad hygiene, and it traps microscopic scraps of whatever was in the mouth. When they analyzed it, they found chemical signatures of two plants, yarrow and chamomile. Now here is the strange part. Both of those plants are bitter. Both have almost no food value at all. And these Neanderthals ate them anyway. Hardy's team, publishing in the journal Naturwissenschaften, argued this was self-medication, because both plants have mild medicinal properties. And a later study backed the medicine idea up hard. In 2017, a team led by Laura Weyrich, publishing in Nature, found that one sick El Sidrón Neanderthal, suffering from a dental abscess, had been chewing poplar, which contains salicylic acid. That is the active ingredient in aspirin. His plaque even held traces of penicillium mold, a natural antibiotic, 40,000 years before we discovered penicillin. So yes, part of this is medicine. But hold on to one detail that refuses to fit neatly. Those Neanderthals carried the TAS2R38 gene. It is the same gene that lets you taste bitterness, which means they knew, precisely, that these plants tasted bad, and they reached for them anyway. Medicine, probably, but maybe also the very first flicker of a mind, reaching for something beyond raw fuel. Now travel east, to a cave in the mountains of Iraqi Kurdistan, Shanidar. If that name rings a bell, it is because this is where archaeologists once found a Neanderthal buried, some believe, with flowers. But in 2022, a team led by Ceren Kabukcu, an archaeobotanist at the University of Liverpool, found something quieter and honestly stranger. Charred crumbs of ancient food, the oldest cooked leftovers ever discovered, roughly 70,000 years old. And when they put those blackened fragments under the microscope, they were not looking at one plain ingredient thrown on a fire. They were looking at a recipe. Wild pulses, lentils, peas, and bitter vetch, pounded and soaked and then mixed with wild mustard and terebinth, the seed of the wild pistachio. That is seasoning. That is a cook standing over a fire, deciding this dish needs a sharper, brighter edge. And here is the thing that stops you cold. Kabukcu's team found the same behavior at a second site, Franchthi Cave in Greece. Except this time it was made by our own ancestors, modern humans, around 13,000 years ago. Two different human species, tens of thousands of years and hundreds of miles apart, reaching for the exact same trick. Bitter, pungent, aromatic plants, added not for calories but for taste. In fact, the researchers noticed the cooks deliberately left some of the natural bitterness in, choosing not to rinse it all away. As Kabukcu put it, this points to culinary cultures, where flavor mattered from a very early date. But bitter seeds in a stew are still tangled up with nutrition. You could squint and call them food. To truly prove that early humans wanted flavor, and only flavor, you need a smoking gun. You need a plant with a powerful taste, almost no food value, and no other earthly reason to be in the pot. And in 2013, a researcher named Hayley Saul found exactly that. Saul and her colleagues were studying broken pottery from 3 sites around the western Baltic, Neustadt in Germany and Okonge in Denmark. Baked onto the inside of those ancient pots were burnt crusts of old food, and inside the crusts were microscopic mineral skeletons called phytoliths. Every plant leaves them, and their shape is a fingerprint. Saul compared these against more than 120 species, and the match was precise. Garlic mustard seed. Aliaria petiolata. Now here is why this is the headline. Garlic mustard has a sharp, peppery, garlicky bite and almost no calories. It is flavor and basically nothing else. And it was baked into pots that also held fish and deer meat, dated to around 6,100 years ago. That is a cook seasoning their dinner. Publishing in the journal PLOS I, Saul's team called it the earliest direct evidence for the use of spice in European cuisine. Not medicine, not survival. Someone, 6,000 years ago, on a cold northern shore, decided that plain boiled fish was boring and did something about it. And once you learn to see this, you start finding it everywhere. Fast forward to the Indus Valley, around 4,500 years ago, to a village called Farmana in what is now northern India. Archaeologists Arunima Kashyap and Steven Weber pulled starch grains off human teeth and out of cooking pots, and they identified two ingredients: turmeric and ginger, two spices you almost certainly have in your kitchen right now. They had found, in effect, the oldest curry on Earth, dated to between 2500 and 2200 BCE. They even found traces of eggplant and salt in the same pots. So the dish that a huge chunk of the planet will eat tonight, a proper spiced curry, has a pedigree older than the finished pyramids at Giza. Let that sit for a second. Curry is older than the pyramids. Then the spice starts to move, and this is the point where it stops being about one clever cook and starts being about the whole world. Around 3,000 years ago, Phoenician traders were filling small clay flasks along the coast of what is now Israel. In 2013, a chemist named Dvory Namdar and her team analyzed the dried residue inside flasks from Tel Dor and other nearby sites, and they found cinnamaldehyde, which is to say, cinnamon. Now here is the problem that discovery creates. 3,000 years ago, cinnamon grew in exactly one part of the world: South and Southeast Asia, Sri Lanka, southern India. That is thousands of miles away, across open ocean, long before anyone had the kind of ships you would assume you needed. And yet cinnamon was already arriving in the Mediterranean. Publishing in the journal Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, Namdar's team suggested it may have been mixed into wine. Think about what that requires. A single flavor was crossing the entire known world, nearly 5,000 kilometers, because people on the far end wanted it badly enough to build a trade route out of nothing but desire. And then there is the pharaoh. Ramesses II died in 1213 BCE, one of the most powerful men who ever drew breath. When his mummy was studied, embalmers had carefully packed his nostrils to keep that famous hooked nose from collapsing under the tight burial wrappings. And the packing they used included peppercorns, black pepper, which grows only in India, on the far side of the ancient world from Egypt. A spice that rare, that hard to obtain, tucked into the face of a god king to preserve him for eternity. That is how much these flavors mattered to us. We did not just eat them, we sent them into the afterlife. And here is the proof that none of this was one culture's strange little quirk. Cross the entire planet to the Americas, a hemisphere with no contact whatsoever with Egypt or the Indus or the Baltic. In 2007, a team led by Linda Perry, publishing in the journal Science, went hunting for a very particular starch fingerprint, the kind left only by chili peppers. They found it clinging to ancient grinding stones and cooking gear at 7 separate sites, stretching from the Bahamas all the way down to southern Peru, some of it around 6,000 years old. The oldest traces, from what is now Ecuador, sat right alongside corn and beans and squash, the founding crops of the New World. So while cooks in the Old World were reaching for mustard and cinnamon and pepper, cooks in the Americas, who had never heard of a single one of those things, were independently reaching for the fire of the chili. Capsaicin, the compound that makes a pepper burn your mouth, has almost no calories at all. It is pure sensation, 2 separate halves of humanity, an entire ocean between them, both decided, on their own, that food should bite back. So here is where the whole story flips over. For a long time, the popular scientific explanation for spices was survival. It is called the antimicrobial hypothesis, argued most famously by Jennifer Billing and Paul Sherman in 1998 in the Quarterly Review of Biology. Their idea was genuinely elegant. Spices kill bacteria. Garlic, onion, oregano, they wipe out many of the microbes that spoil meat. And hot countries, the theory goes, use more spice because hot countries spoil food faster. In this telling, spice is not a treat. Spice is medicine. Spice is armor. Spice keeps you from dying of your own dinner. And you know what? It is partly true. Those compounds really do fight bacteria. But it cannot be the origin story, because look back at that oldest piece of hard evidence. The garlic mustard on the cold Baltic shore, 6,000 years ago. That is not a hot climate desperately fighting spoilage. That is a chilly northern fishing village, where food kept perfectly well. There was no microbial crisis to solve. The seed went into the pot for one reason, and one reason only. Because it tasted good. The bacteria-killing benefit, if it mattered at all, came along later. A lucky accident riding behind the real motive. And that inverts everything we assume about our ancestors. We tend to picture them locked in a grim, unbroken struggle for calories, where every single choice was about survival and nothing else. But a spice is the opposite of survival. A spice is a luxury with a caloric value of essentially zero. Every single pinch of it is a human being saying, I have enough to eat, and now I want it to be good. That is not nutrition. That is culture, sitting right there on the plate. The moment a Neanderthal reached for bitter mustard, the moment a Baltic cook crushed garlic seed into a fish stew, someone quietly stepped across the line that separates eating from dining. So let's lay the whole timeline back out. 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals at El Sidrón are chewing bitter, medicinal plants they know taste terrible. 70,000 years ago at Shanidar, and again 13,000 years ago in Greece, cooks are deliberately seasoning stews with wild mustard and pistachio. 6,100 years ago on the Baltic coast, garlic mustard becomes the first spice we can prove was used purely for its flavor. 4,500 years ago, turmeric and ginger are simmering in the Indus Valley. 3,000 years ago, cinnamon crosses an entire ocean. And by 1213 BCE, Indian pepper is riding into eternity inside the nose of a pharaoh. The tools changed. The trade routes exploded across continents. But the impulse itself never changed at all. It was there before the first farm, before the first written word, quite possibly before our species even had the planet to itself. So go back to that little jar in your cupboard, the one with no calories. The one a purely rational animal would ignore forever. When you shake it over your food tonight, understand that you are not doing anything new. You are repeating one of the oldest human gestures there is. The quiet, stubborn, gloriously impractical insistence that simply being alive is not enough, that it should also taste like something. 50,000 years of cooks are standing behind you at that stove, and every one of them agrees. All the research is linked in the description.